Hey, what's up everybody? TooTallToby here, and today we've got a really fun project that we get to work on together in Onshape. And hopefully by the end of this project, you will have some Onshape documents that you can turn into physical 3D printed parts so that you too can organize your desktop. This was a problem I really struggled with. I had all these components that I use over and over again, physical parts on my desk, and they would get kind of scattered everywhere. And so I created my own version of this project where I was able to organize the most frequently used tools on my desk so that they're always right here, ready to go. I can just grab this tool at any point right here, ready to go. So hopefully by the end of this video, you too will understand how to model up your own components, how to organize them in an assembly, and how to create in-context references in your assembly so that if you were to move one of these components, you can just right-click and choose Update Context, and then you'll see the pocket inside of that block will also update. So hopefully by the end of this, you will see how to create an assembly that looks something like this. You'll have your tray, you'll have your blocks, and you'll have your little pockets here for your components. And don't worry, I'm going to be here with you step by step the entire time. So if that all sounds good to you, hit the like button on this video and let's get into it. All right, so let's get into it here in Onshape. So here we are looking at the documents page of Onshape. And one thing I want you to do is expand your folders section. We are going to create a new folder to organize this project. So let's make sure that we expand that folder section. And then we're going to choose Create Folder. And you can call this something like 2025 Desktop Organizer. I'm going to call mine actually 2025 Tutorial Desktop Organizer, just to make it a little bit more clear for me what I'm doing with this. But Organizer, and just make sure you name it something you can quickly get to that's easily identifiable. We're going to browse into this folder quite a bit. So we're going to say Create. And now we see that that folder is empty and any new documents that we create are going to land in this folder. So the next thing we need to do is look around at our desk and try to find some cool parts that we can model for our desktop organizer. Now, I encourage everyone to model parts from your desk. I think it's a great way to learn more about Onshape and to improve your Onshape skills. However, for this tutorial, I think what you should do is you should just use the files that I've modeled up. So you can see here I've modeled up these 4 files, and I've also included some links to those files down in the description of this video. So if you go down into the description and you click on these links, it'll be easier for you to follow along with this tutorial. And then on your second time through, you could do this by modeling up your own parts. So I'm going to start out here with the screwdriver. I'll click on this link, and what that will do is it'll open up that file directly into my browser here. So here you can see I'm opening up that project, the screwdriver project, directly into my browser. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other 3. So we'll open up that one, we'll open up this one, and we'll open up this final link here. So we've shared these Onshape documents to make it a little bit easier for you to follow along with this project. So there we see we've got these 4 documents. These are all the parts that I modeled up myself. These are parts that came off of my desktop. So we can see here now that each of these files is currently set to this document is view only, make a copy to edit. We're going to use that button on all 4 of these documents. So for the screwdriver here, we're going to say make a copy to edit. We're going to go into your main folder. That's my company folder there. We're going to go into this tutorial folder that we just created and copy here. We're going to go to this next one, the remote for the light. I'm going to say click here to make a copy. You'll notice that the copy is appended with a name here, -copy. If you want to change that, you can. It's going to be your project now, your document now. So we're going to copy that one into that same folder, copy here. And we're going to do the same thing with the hard drive here, make a copy to edit. Go into this folder here, and we're going to say copy here. And copy it into that same folder. And then finally, the 4-color pen. Where would we be without the 4-color pen? This is one of the most important tools on the desk. In fact, so important, I've left slots for 3 of them because I always seem to lose them. So we're going to say make a copy to edit, go into this folder here and copy this into this tutorial for the desktop organizer. So what we'll see here is when those are done copying, each of those now has removed that view only tag, and these files now can be edited, or these projects now can be edited. So if you wanted to go go in and maybe change the diameter of the pen or change the dimensions on the hard drive, that's totally up to you. You can change these to match your project. But again, I think maybe for this time through, you just want to leave these documents the way that they are, and that way you can follow along a little more easily. The other thing I just want to mention here is that when it comes to modeling up these parts, I am a huge advocate of working with images. So what I do typically is I grab the key dimensions off of the model. So you see I grabbed some of these key dimensions off of the screwdriver here. And then in my second sketch, what I do is I bring in an image and I align that image to those key dimensions. So I actually took a photograph with my phone and then I brought that photograph in, and that really helps streamline the process of modeling up these parts. If you can learn how to do that, get in the habit of doing that, that can really help speed along this process, because it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to have enough information that you can create kind of like the scooped out areas in your desktop organizer. So, you use the photos, they help you get close, they help you recognize kind of a little bit more nuanced features here in the design, but it really just needs to be enough that you can use it in your in-context modeling so you can model up those blocks. So you'll see that in a lot of my parts. You'll also see that the parts are kind of like halfway mocked up. Like I don't have all the internal guts of the screwdriver here. If we look at this thing in a section view, I'm missing some of the inserts here on the inside of the screwdriver. I don't have all the guts of the 4-color pen. So, if we look at this one here in a section view, you can see I don't have like the 4 individual ink, the ballpoint ink leads here that go up to the top. It's just kind of enough information that if I take this thing and I sink it into a 3-dimensional block down at the bottom here, I'll be able to reference these surfaces. But again, I know I said this before, I hate to repeat myself, but I really think it's a valuable time-saving tool here. I brought in an image of the pen. So I started out here, my very first sketch is a layout with the key dimensions of the pen, just measuring the physical pen. And then I brought in an image, and the reason that was important is because it helped me realize that the pen doesn't just come straight down in this blue section, it actually kind of tapers in on an arc here. Well, I'm able to use that information when I get down to that section of the pen. So when I get down here to this lower blue area, if we look at this sketch here, you can see it was a lot easier for me to kind of capture that arc there by tracing over that image. And it might have been something that I would have missed if I was just doing everything kind of by measuring the physical part. So if you can get in the habit of taking photographs of your models and then using some layout geometry to get the key dimensions and then sizing that photograph to your model, you're really going to speed along this process of creating your own desktop organizer. So now what we see is that we've copied those parts, and those parts have actually been copied into our project directory. So we could go back here to our project directory, refresh the page, and this is what we want to see. All 4 of those projects have been copied here into this directory, into this folder. So I think that's a good place to stop for this video. And in the next video, we're going to create that main red tray. All right, so now we're going to create the document that is going to represent kind of the main tray, but really this is going to be the document that represents the overall project. You can see that we are currently in the folder called Tutorial Desktop Organizer, so anything new we create will automatically land in this folder. So we're going to say Create Document, and we'll call this one 2025 Desktop Organizer. It's the overall project, and we're going to say Create. And this is going to make a new document in that folder. And in this new document, we are going to create an assembly. We're going to add the main tray to the assembly. We're going to add some blocks. So we're going to have that kind of like main tray. That'll actually probably be red. And then inside of that main tray, we're going to have some blocks, a block for the screwdriver, a block for the hard drive, and a block over here for the light remote. And then we're going to add in those parts. We're going to add in the screwdriver. We're going to add in the hard drive, the 4-color pens, and the remote here. We're going to add in those parts from an external source. And maybe that's something you haven't done before. Maybe you've only ever worked with parts that are in the current document. So maybe this will be something new for you. But before we can get to any of those steps, let's start out by creating that kind of main red tray. So here we are in our part studio, in our default part studio, and we're going to click the top plane, S key, begin a new sketch, and then we'll press the letter N on our keyboard, and that's going to get us normal to that top plane. Now we're going to begin a center point rectangle, and we're going to drop in a rectangle here representing the overall size of our red tray. Now the question is, what size should this be? And when you're creating your own desktop organizer, what I suggest you do is lay out your parts, lay out the parts that you're trying to organize, and just get some kind of rudimentary dimensions based on that overall layout. Maybe you could use a piece of paper paper and kind of sketch on there what you think the size of this thing should be. The other thing you want to consider is what is the build envelope of your 3D printer. So for this project, we're going to use the dimensions 210 by 160. So 210 by 160, and that should be the beginning of your first sketch here on the top plane. Then once you've got that rectangle in there at 210 by 160, let's add some radii in the corner here. So we're going to use the sketch fillet command. We're going to pick these 1, 2, 3, 4 corners, and then we're going to add a radius here of 20 millimeters. So that to me looks like a pretty good start to this design, 160 by 210. Let's turn that shape into an extrusion. So we're going to extrude this shape and we're going to bring it up to a height of 25 millimeters. I like it. The default value works for me. So that's going to be the beginning of that red tray. And now we're going to need to hollow that out so that we can put in some of these other components, these block components. So we'll choose the shell command here, shell, and we'll pick this face up top here. And let's give that shell a wall thickness of 4 millimeters. All right, so this is looking pretty good here, but I think what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to start up what's called a variable studio. Now, a variable studio is basically a place where you can put dimensions and values that can be referenced by other features throughout the project. So we're going to go over here to this tab, the variable studio tab here in Onshape. We're going to click on that, or the variable table tab. We're going to click on that tab, and then we're going to click on this button down here at the very bottom, variable studio, create variable studio. And the reason we're creating this variable studio is because we want to use these values in multiple parts throughout our project. So the variable studio section shows up top here, and we're going to type in this first one here. Let's call this one tray underscore height. And then here for the value for that tray height, we'll type in 25. And then let's do another one here. We'll call this one wall underscore thickness. You can't use spaces here, so I use underscores instead of spaces. And then we'll make the wall thickness here 4 millimeters. So now we can go over to our tree. We could double click on the extrude here in our tree, double click here on extrude 1. And then we could say that we want this depth, instead of being 25, we can type the hashtag symbol. So shift 3 for hashtag. And then you can use the up and down arrows to go through this list here and find the variable for tray height. So we're going to link that to tray height, enter, enter, enter. And then if we come back over to the variable studio and we change this to like 15 millimeters, enter, there we go, it updates. If we change it to 35, enter. Oh yeah, this is working good. And then let's change that back to 25. And then for our shell, we can do the same thing. So if we go over here to the shell, double click on the shell feature, and then we type in here, hashtag, and you move up and down here, wall thickness, enter, enter, enter. And now we come over here to our variable studio and we change this to maybe 2 millimeters, enter. There, the shell updated. And if we change that to 6 millimeters, enter. Oh yeah, this is working good. Nice and linked. And so we'll change that back to 4 millimeters. And there we go. We are good to go on that one as well. So I'm going to close this variable table for now, but we're going to come back in and we're going to use this more as the project proceeds. And to kind of finish off this model here, I think maybe what I'll do is I'll turn off the planes. So I'll press the letter P on my keyboard and I will come over here to the name of the part in this parts list. I'll right mouse button and choose rename, and we'll call this something like main red tray. And then let's also right click there, and from the right click we'll choose edit appearance, and we can change this to like a red, or we could go into the mixer and just dial it back a little, make it a little more like a mauve. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And we hit the check mark. And then finally, let's rename the tab down here so we don't get confused. Let's right click down here and say rename, and again we could call this main red tray. And so that should do it for creating that main red tray. And now we are going to take that red tray and add it to an assembly and start adding some of our other components to this assembly. But I think we'll do that in the next section of this video. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any questions so far. Be sure to hit the like button, and I will see you in the next section. All right, so now that we've got that main red tray set up as its own part, let's add that to the assembly here in our desktop organizer. So we go over here to this assembly tab. You know, anytime you start or create a new document, you're going to have a part studio and an assembly. And here in the assembly, I'm going to press the letter S, and I'm going to use the S key to utilize the insert component command, the insert command here. You can see it's also up here on our main toolbar, but I just like doing it with the S key. I use this command a lot, and I use this command here a lot. This is the group command, group. So I use both of those quite a bit. So I'm going to choose to insert, and then I can either insert a component from the current project, from the current document, or I could insert a component from another document, and we'll do that in just a few moments. Now, here in this current document, I've got a part studio called main red tray. It really doesn't matter if I choose the overall part studio or the part itself, because there's only one part in that part studio. So I'll just choose the overall part studio, and we'll click the green check mark, and that adds that part directly on the origin. Now, at this point, I can take this part and I can drag it away from the origin. So I'm going to press Control Z, and then I'm going to right click on that part over here in the assembly tree, and I'm going to choose Fix. And that way, that part will remain stationary. I'm going to be designing all the other parts around this part, so I think it's a good idea for that part to remain stationary. So now I'm ready to insert some components from an external source. And the first one that I'm going to insert here is going to be the screwdriver. Now, I just want to call your attention to the fact that the screwdriver is open in its own tab, which is nice. It's nice that these are open in their own tab still. If it's not currently open in its own tab, you could just launch a new tab and then browse to that document. But what I want you to notice here is that the screwdriver is a part studio with multiple parts in it. And there's an assembly, but the assembly is not configured. It's not set up yet. I don't have the components in that assembly yet. And so what you could end up doing, and I don't think this is a good idea, but what you could end up doing is you could end up coming in here and pressing the S key, saying insert, and then going here to other documents. So this is where you could browse to these other documents. And I'm going to go into my company here, TooTallToby.com, and I'm going to go into this 2025 tutorial, and I'm going to grab that screwdriver, and I'm going to, here you see we've got the part studio, pick the screwdriver here from the part studio, and I'm just going to drop this here in the background. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to pick another part from the other documents, the 4-color pen, and I'm going to choose this part studio here. And when I choose this part studio, I drop this part here, and so on and so on. Let's say I did that with the other components. Well, unfortunately, what I end up with is I end up with each individual part from each of those part studios just individually listed here. And you can see that I'm able to grab these components and just drag these components apart. They don't stick together. It doesn't really behave like a sub-assembly. This isn't really what I want. Ideally, we would want this thing to behave like a sub-assembly. So to accomplish that, let's make an assembly in each of those documents. So I'm going to press Control Z here, move these parts back together. I'm just spamming Control Z here, and I press it one last time to get that component out of there. So you can see we still got the main tray. It's still set to fixed here. So I think we're in a good spot with this component. Let's flip over to this other tab here. And on this tab, let's go to the assembly tab. So I'm going down to the bottom here, going down to this assembly tab, and S key, insert. And this is going to be from the current document. I'm going to choose the screwdriver part studio. So choose the screwdriver part studio there, and then I'm going to hit the green check mark here to insert that entire, all those components from the part studio. And then I can right click on this main handle here, and from the right click on the main handle, I can choose fix. So now that becomes kind of the fixed component in this assembly. And then I'm just going to put a window around everything, S key, group. So there we go. That gives us a nice assembly or a nice sub-assembly. And let's rename this tab down here, right click, rename. And then once I rename, I'll call this something like, I'll just call it screwdriver, assemb, something like that, screwdriver assemb. And then when you're working in Onshape, I mean, let's just talk about versions real quick here. The idea of versions is basically revision control, revision management, document management. It's a very deep topic, and I'm not going to get into it really at all here in this video, other than to say, if you go over here to your version and history, and you notice this button, create version, and that's also available right here, right on this sidebar, create version. So we're talking about show version in history and create version. If you come over here and you click on that button that says create version, it's a good idea to do this. It creates kind of a waypoint. It creates like a reference point. And once we create this version, V1 can never be changed. Okay, we can work in the workspace called main. So you'll notice over here, if I go over here to versions and histories now, I've got this V1, which I can click on, and then I've also got this main here. Well, the reason I wanted to call this to your attention is because occasionally when you're working here in Onshape, you'll get a message at the top of the screen that'll say something like, versions are for view only. You're currently viewing V1. Do you want to return to main? So what that means is that the only time you can actually edit is when you're working in that main workspace, or when you're working in some kind of a workspace. And if you're working in a version, it's really view only. It's meant to be immutable. It's meant to be something that can never be changed. It's almost like a save point, but it's not exactly what it is, but you can think of it that way. So what we want to do is we just want to recognize that if you ever get this message, all you have to do is click return to main, and you're going to be good to go. You're going to be able to edit again. You're going to be able to do all the things that you're used to doing. So be on the lookout for that message. And now we are ready to basically rinse and repeat what we just did there with the screwdriver on the other components. So for the light remote control, you can see we've got a part studio here. You can see we've got multiple parts in this part studio. You can see we've got an assembly tab down at the bottom here. So let's click on that assembly tab. And then we're going to choose to S key, insert. We choose the remote part studio. That grabs all the parts. We hit the green check mark. We right click on the main part here. We choose fix. And then we put a window around everything. S key, group. And hit the green check mark. We can rename this assembly tab down here. Rename. Call this remote-ASSM. Make it an assembly. And optionally, we can choose to create a version. Create a version V1, kind of like a save point. You know, now we've got a V1. You'll sometimes see calls to those versions when you're building projects. So it's kind of good to at least know that they exist. So now we're going to go to the hard drive. So the hard drive here is actually a part studio, but it only has one part in it. So we really don't need to create an assembly from the hard drive. We can just leave that one as is. But again, just to be consistent here, we could click the create version and create a V1. It kind of acts like a save point for that component. And then finally, the 4-color pen here. We go to the 4-color pen. We're going to click on the tab for assembly. We're going to press the S key, insert. We're going to choose the 4-color pen part studio. We're going to hit the green check mark here. We're going to choose to right click on this white part here and fix. We're going to put a window around everything, and we're going to S key, group everything together here. Now, when you do that group, basically it's like a join. It's like nothing can move relative to each other. Relative to each other, nothing can move. And since the white part can't move, nothing can move. So that's what that group feature is doing. And then we will right-click down here and choose rename. We'll call this one 4-color pen assem. And finally, we will add a version. So you can come over here and we can say create version and V1 and create. And so that should take care of it for those components. You might want to come back here to the desktop organizer and maybe just refresh. Sometimes I find that refreshing will kind of like help make sure that those assemblies now are ready to be inserted. And so now we can go to S key insert. And we're going to say we're going to insert from another document, browse into our company, browse into our tutorial, and we're going to choose the screwdriver once again. Now, this time, when we go to insert that screwdriver, we're going to click on this button here that says Assemblies. So now that screwdriver has an assembly, screwdriver assembly, and once we click on that, you see we can kind of drop this anywhere. Let's say we just drop it out here in space. And just to get a one-to-one comparison, we're going to hit the green check mark, and now we're going to grab this handle here and go to move it around, and look at that. Everything moves together. And if we look at the tree, we see that the screwdriver assembly is listed here in the tree with the components listed underneath it. And so that is exactly what we were hoping for. So let's repeat that process here. We're going to insert another component. We're going to insert the, let's go back here. We're going to insert the 4-color pen, and we're going to go to the Assemblies tab here. Assemblies. Go to the Assemblies tab. Here's a 4-color pen assembly. And you can click the green check mark if you want, or you can click out in space. I don't think it's really going to make a difference here. It's just a matter of where the component begins. And so we can do S key, insert component here. We're going to go back one level. We're going to click here on the remote control, click on the tab for Assemblies, and we're going to add the remote assem and we'll hit the green check mark there to add that. And then finally, we're going to S key insert. And for this last one, we're going to insert the hard drive. And for the hard drive, like I said earlier, the hard drive, you really only have this one part in the Part Studio. So you can just click here, the hard drive part, and you can click the green check mark, and boom, that adds in the hard drive. So now we've got our 4 components here. You can left mouse button and drag to move these components, but we're going to talk more about moving and organizing these components in the next video. All right, so now we're going to start moving these components around and trying to get these components into position for our design, for our desk organizer. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to start by just doing a left click and drag. This is the easiest way to move these components around. You don't have to bring up any kind of a manipulator handle or anything like that. You just left click and drag. Unfortunately, these components are not really oriented in the correct rotation to really make this work. So that moves us into our second tool, which is if you click on one of these components, you can use these little grips here to change the rotation. So if you grab this little circle grip here, drag it around, there we go. We'll get that to about 90 degrees. That looks good. We can click on the pen here. This one, we're going to rotate in a different axis. So we'll drag this around here to 90 degrees. That is good. We can take this one here, the screwdriver, and we can grab this handle here, drag that around to 90 degrees. You'll notice I'm putting the magnetic tip of the screwdriver over here on the right side of the tray. So I'm going to put the hard drive over here on the left side of the tray. So then we'll take the hard drive and we will rotate that one. Let's rotate it so that the port is facing up. And then let's click on the hard drive again and we will rotate it this way by 90 degrees as well. So there we go. So after that, what I usually do is I first do a Shift 1, and I just kind of make sure that all the parts are at least above the tray. Nothing is underneath the tray. And then I do a Shift 5. And from the Shift 5, what I can do is I can just drag these parts around and get them kind of close to being in the correct positions. So you can see here I can do a Shift 5 and just puts me into a top view. And that way I can drag these components around and get them kind of close to the position that I'm going to want them to be in. Now, really the correct way to get these components to be fixed in place or to be mated into place is to actually use a mate. So to actually use a mate here, what I might do is I might go into maybe this component here. I might go into a fastened mate, which is this very first mate type here, a fastened mate. And then I might choose to create a fastened mate here that goes between the center of this face here and the center of this face down here, the very bottom of the tray, the center of this face down here. And certainly that will work, and you see that that locks that component into place directly on that bottom face. And there's an option over here for offset. And so if we use that option for offset, that allows us to input values here. Like I could say, I want that to be offset by X 60. Well, that's not the right direction. Let's go X negative 60. There we go. That's the right direction. And I can offset this by Y. We could say we want to offset this by Y 25. Again, the wrong direction. Offset this by Y negative 80. Okay, that's getting us close to the right spot. And then we can offset it by Z as well, Z 15. And once again, the wrong direction. So I'm going to use here Z negative 15. So there we go. Now we're offsetting in the correct direction. And so if we again go to a Shift 5 here, whoops, hit escape there, click in the background, go to a Shift 5 here, we can kind of dial these in a little bit closer. So maybe instead of X negative 60, this could be X negative 40, or Shift tab there, X negative 30. All right, that's getting closer. How about X negative 20? There we go. I like that. That looks good. And then for my Y here, maybe I could go over a little further, Y negative 85. All right, that looks good. And then for my Z here, if we go into Shift 1, so we're looking at this thing in a front view, that's probably pretty good. Maybe I could come down a little bit, maybe like a negative 12. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that. That should get us into a good spot there for that component. So we could hit the green check mark, and now we've added a mate, which has locked down the location of that hard drive. And that is certainly the correct way to do it. It just, you need to be pretty comfortable with the idea of mates and mate connectors. And if you're not comfortable with those ideas yet, you know, practice, you'll get better at it, but don't worry about it. You don't even need to do that for this project. That's the cool thing about Onshape, is that you can really get to your end results quickly, just with some other cool tricks that we can use here to manipulate these components. One of those is the ability to rotate it. Another one here is if we press Shift 1, so, you know, Shift 5 looking down from the top, these parts look pretty good. I'm pretty happy with where these parts are. If we press Shift 1, get into a front view, then we can go over here to this cube. And we can fly out this cube here, and we can say that we want to use our hidden lines visible. So hidden edges visible. And that way, as we drag this component down, we can kind of see where it is relative to the bottom of the assembly. And I think that what I want for this one is I want it just to be a little bit above where the blocks are going to end up. So just a little bit above where the blocks are going to end up there. And I'll do the same thing with this component. I'll end up having it just stick out a little bit above where the blocks are going to be. And then for the pen here, I'll drag the pen down so it's kind of right in line with the bottom of the screwdriver and the bottom of the hard drive. Everything is right about at the same height. So I think that looks pretty good. Pretty quick way to get those components into place. So I think that's just about it for that section of the design. You know, maybe the final thing would be to apply a pattern here of the pen, but I think I'm going to save that just for a little bit further down the road. So let's go back to this cube here. Let's change our hidden lines back to hidden lines removed. And in the next video, we're going to talk about how to start creating those blocks to hold these components. All right, so now we've got 3 tabs down at the bottom here. We've got the main red tray, we've got the variable studio, and we've got our assembly. And the next thing we're going to do is start adding in the actual blocks, doing the in-context design. That's really going to be kind of the meat and potatoes of this video. However, before we get started with that, I just want to go back into the variable studio and add in some variables. And the variables that I want to add in here are going to be the offset gap here. So we're going to make an offset gap here of 0.8 millimeters. Now, the reason we're using 0.8 millimeters is just because I know that on my printer, if I print out something with that gap, it'll give me just enough play. It'll be a little bit loose. It's not going to be super tight, and I want to be able to quickly put these blocks in and out. Maybe if I decide to get rid of that screwdriver and replace it with a different screwdriver or a different tool altogether, I want to be able to easily remove that block. These don't need to be in there super tight for a desktop organizer. So 0.8 is good clearance, but if I do decide to tighten it up or loosen it up, I want to be able to do it in one spot and have it change everywhere. The next variable I'm going to add is going to be for all of these corner radii here. Just aesthetically, I want these all to be the same. And so we'll probably make that something like 8 millimeters. Maybe like 8 millimeters will look good. But if it doesn't look good, we can change it in one spot and it'll change it everywhere. And then finally, I'm going to have a little rollover fillet up at the top. I think I'll probably make that something like 3 millimeters. And again, if I decide to change that, that's fine. We can change it. But we want to be able to change it in one spot and have it affect all the parts in our document. So let's go into our variable studio and we'll start making these variables. And then in the next video, we'll actually start making those blocks. So the first one here is going to be offset underscore distance. And we will make that one 0.8. The next one is going to be block corner radius. And that one is going to have a value of 8 millimeters. And then the final one here is going to be block top radius. And that one will have a value of 3 millimeters. And like I said, if we decide we want to change those values at some point in the future, we can do that. And if we think of anything else that we're going to use across multiple parts, we could add those as well. So let's get all those variables added into our variable studio, and then let's head back to the assembly tab, and we will see how to start adding in those blocks to our assembly. So currently we can see that we've got these 3 tabs at the bottom, the part studio for the main red tray, our variable studio, and our assembly. Now we're going to choose to create a new part studio so that we can create the block for the screwdriver. Now, the thing is, when we go to create that block for the screwdriver, we're going to be creating a new part studio, but we're not going to do it down here. We're not going to go plus and then create part studio. Instead, we're going to use this icon here. And what this icon does is it lets us create a new part with a reference or a context to the assembly. So you'll see here it says create part studio in context. We click on that button, and then Onshape is going to say, well, where do you want the origin to be for this new part? And if you're just getting into this world of creating components in context, you're probably always going to pick the origin of the assembly. So I'm going to pick the origin of the assembly here. That adds the origin of the assembly here, and that is where our new component is going to have its front, top, and right plane. So we're going to click the green check mark, and now a new part studio is created created. You'll notice it down here at the bottom of the screen, there's a new tab for Part Studio 1. That's going to be our block for the screwdriver. But you also notice that within that Part Studio, we see this kind of transparent overlay of the assembly. And the cool thing is we can actually reference information from that assembly. So for example, I can click on this face down here and I can choose to begin a new sketch. So now I'm sketching on that face, and now that face is a reference or a context here from the assembly. So I'm going to choose that face, and I'm going to choose to convert the entities of that face, convert the entire face over. So you see it basically traces that entire face. Let me press Shift 1 here to get to or Shift 5 to get to a top view. So here we are, Shift 5, looking at this thing from the top. And now I'm going to do an offset. So I'm going to offset some of this geometry, offset this, and this, and this, and this, and this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 entities here. Let's do an offset. And we're going to reverse the direction of that offset. And then we can left click to accept that direction. And then for the distance of that offset, we're going to type hashtag. And we're going to go down here to the offset distance 0.8. So enter, enter. There we go. And now the only thing that's left to do here is just close off this sketch. So I'm going to create a line here. It's going to start kind of over here on this side on that offset line, picking that offset line there. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to have that go to this location over here, horizontal, and again to that offset line. So now the only dimension left to add here is the width of the block. So again, I'm going to pick this offset line here at the top, come down here for the width of the block, and let's make that like 48. I like the way that looks there, 48 millimeters. I think that looks pretty good. And so now I can take that geometry and jump into an extrude command. So we're going to S key extrude, or if you don't have it on your S key, you can just click extrude up here in the upper left. And we're going to extrude that. And we're going to start out just by clicking in the background and pressing space because it didn't get the correct contour here. So space, and that clears our selections. And then we'll just click here inside of this region. So there is our block for the screwdriver. And here what we can do is we can again reference the assembly. We can say we want that depth to go up to face. And so when we go up to face, we can pick this face here from the tray and look at that. That way the block will always come up to that face of the tray. So we hit the green check mark and there we go. That is our block. Now this Part Studio here represents the block for the screwdriver. And so if we come down here into the name of the parts in the parts list down here, we can rename that. So Shift N, we'll call that block 1. And over here, even on this tab, we could do the same thing, right click, rename. We could call this one block 1 for screwdriver. And then what we can do is we can notice at the top of the screen, there's this button that says insert and go to assembly. Now, this is something that can be very confusing when you first start doing these in-context part creations. But basically what's happening here is we've created a new Part Studio, but we haven't yet added that part to the assembly. So here you can see what the assembly looks like, and here you can see what that Part Studio looks like. And so obviously we haven't added that part to the assembly. So let's choose this command here, insert and go to assembly. And what are we going to insert? You'll notice here that it picked up on that part from the parts list. It's called block 1. If it was still called part 1, this part can be a little bit confusing, but hopefully because we renamed it, it's a little easier to understand what's going on here. So we're going to take that block 1 and we're going to add that to the assembly, and there we go. And so now what we can do is we can take this block here, and you'll notice that it can just be dragged off into space. That's really not what we want with this in-context part. So let's press Control Z to undo that, and then let's press the S key and do a group. And so to group, we're going to say that this component and this component cannot move independent of one another. That's what group will do. And since the red tray is fixed, that also means that this component now cannot be moved. I can no longer left click and drag that component. So that is some good stuff. And now what we'll see is that if we go back here, if we go back to the block for the screwdriver, we see that now we no longer see that assembly information. Well, that's not really what we want, because now we want to create a trace, or we want to create some references back to the screwdriver to get the shape that we're going to be scooping out of this block. So let's go back to the assembly here. And when we go back to the assembly, what we can do is right click on that part, and we can choose to edit that part in the context of the assembly. So edit in context, and we're just going to select this context 1. In the future, you'll get into more complicated assemblies where you have multiple contexts and you rename them. But for this assembly, we're just going to keep it pretty straightforward. So edit in context, context 1, and there we go. Now we can see everything, including that screwdriver. All right, everybody. Well, at this point, you should be editing that part in the Part Studio, and you should see all the components from the assembly in that transparent view because you're editing in context. Of course, if you have any questions, please let me know down below in the comments. But I thought this would be a good time to take a short break. We've been going for 40 minutes strong already, so good job, everybody. But maybe take a break, stretch your legs, go outside, get some fresh air, get a fresh cup of coffee, and then come on back. We've included a link right down below in the description to Part 2.